Dr. Bonnie Dunbar grew up here, born in Sunnyside, went to school in Sunnyside, first member of her family to go to college, received degrees in engineering from the University of Washington, including a PhD in engineering. Story is that she got the space bug fairly early in her life, actually applied to NASA to join the U.S. Aeronautics Corps right out of high school, and though she wasn't accepted into that at that time, the idea of being part of NASA stayed with her. At the University of Washington, she was part of a research team that developed the materials for the heat shield tiles on the space shuttles. Out of college, she spent time working for Boeing and Rockwell International Space Division. Reapplied to the astronaut corps, 1980 became an astronaut candidate, flew her first mission in 1985, and eventually completed 4 other missions, including 2 to Mir, the Russian space station. She was with NASA through 2005, and then, as many of you know, went to Seattle to serve as the president and CEO of the Museum of Flight, where she stayed till 2010. There is light. From 2013 through 2015, Dr. Dunbar led the University of Houston STEM Center, was a faculty member in the Cullen College of Engineering. Currently, she is Distinguished Research Professor of Aerospace Engineering and serves as Director of the Institute for Engineering Education and Innovation, a joint entity in the Texas A&M University Engineering Experiment Station and the Dwight Look College of Engineering at Texas A&M University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bonnie Dunbar.
Well, thank you very much, President Bennett and Platform Party, faculty, families, and students. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here on this glorious Yakima Valley Day to celebrate your academic success. You're celebrating a success so richly deserved, and normally you invite a commencement speaker to impart some gems of wisdom for the future. It's always a daunting task. What can you do in a few minutes that's going to provide some help along the way as you look forward to the rest of your life? And for me, it was a bit of a struggle, because you think back over the years, what made a difference? What might make a difference to you? And then I thought upon the fact that for the last nearly 4 years, I have been a professor of engineering, first at the University of Houston and now at Texas A&M in aeronautics. And I would ask my students in this introductory class to engineering what they thought, how they thought I grew up. What did my parents do? And the answers always amazed me. My favorite answer was, well, it was easy for you. Both of your parents were probably astronauts. The other one was, well, both of your parents were probably academics. And I thought, how did we get to this point? When I was growing up here in the Yakima Valley, nobody said that. The horizons were open. We were growing up in an environment of post-World War II. We were at peace, and our parents wanted us to succeed where they could not. It was part of the American dream. So let me tell you about my journey, because I grew up like many of you did. I'm going to go back a couple generations, maybe as some of you have, because there are probably grandparents and parents out here as well. So my father's parents immigrated from Scotland. Neither one of them had a college degree. In fact, it's not clear my grandmother did graduate from high school. My grandfather, though, did in Dundee, but he had no opportunities. They were farm laborers and milkmaids, and so he immigrated through Ellis Island, as he told me, at the age of 19, because he had a dream. And that dream was to hold the soil of his own land in his hands. My mother's parents came from Germany and Holland and maybe England, we're not quite sure. We think so. And although my father's parents landed in Condon, Oregon, my mother grew up in Havre, Montana. My father, one of 3 boys, my mother, one of 9 kids, growing up on a sheep ranch. Neither one of them had opportunities to go on to higher education, but they had a value, and that value was education. That value was learning. And if we, myself and my 2 younger brothers and sisters, had the opportunity to go to school, by George, we were going to go to school and we were going to study and we were going to work hard and we were going to have the opportunity to achieve any dream that we wanted. So my mother and father married and they landed in Outlook, in a piece of land that was very rocky, didn't start out with irrigation. In fact, I remember my summers of picking rock. Some of you might know what that means. When I went to college, some of my classmates had no idea what that meant. Rocks grow, they come up out of the ground, and you have to clear them before you plow it and plant. My father's dream and my mother's was a cattle ranch, Hereford cattle, but you had to farm to have a diversified income. There was no paycheck every month, every week. It was usually once a year, as many of you know. Did the crops succeed? Were you able to feed your cattle? I grew up with 4-H for 9 years and raised steers and rode a horse and sewed. My mother sewed most of my clothes, and then I began to sew and tried cooking. Cooking was not my forte. My brother was much better at oatmeal cookies, I remember that. But when I was in about the 3rd grade, growing up there in Outlook and looking to the north where there were no lights north of us, Rattlesnake Mountains, I used to see the Milky Way. And the Milky Way was this big stripe of stars that would come out of the mountain. And I was fascinated with it. About that time, we got our first TV, and if I finished my chores when I came from home from school, I got to watch Flash Gordon. Some of you are laughing because you know who Flash Gordon was. Many of you do not. Black and white TV, 1 channel out of Yakima, KIMA. No special effects. You could actually see the strings on the spaceship as it moved across the screen. I didn't see them. I was a kid. I wanted to be part of that spaceship. I wanted to be exploring new planets, new horizons. But I was a pretty shy girl. I was the oldest, of 4, and didn't see a lot of my friends in the summer, so I read. I read because the bookmobile came around about once a month, and I could check out as many books as I wanted, well, maximum of 10, I think. My brothers and I had little hammocks made out of gunny sacks in the trees down in our little canyon, and I would take my books down there sometimes, but I could get into a book and I could go anywhere in the world. And then the nation decided to go to the moon. And that was exciting. We listened as John Kennedy in 1962 committed the nation to the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. And that we would set the path forward in education, in science, and research. And that was exciting, because suddenly that was going to be reality. I so read many books and learned terms that on my school bus, because we had to take a bus into Outlook grade school, 8 grades, about 22 in my class for 8 grades, that I think I convinced some of my schoolmates I actually was an alien. The term flying saucer was invented here in Washington State by a pilot flying over the Cascades. But I didn't share that much with many people, except a couple of my classmates who did call me Martian. So in the 8th grade, we graduated. We got a common school diploma, and then we could decide to go to high school, junior high or high school in Sunnyside, another bus, probably maybe an hour each way into Sunnyside. And I had a wonderful teacher by the name of Mr. Miller, who was my 6th grade teacher and my 8th grade teacher. And as I was preparing to leave to go into junior high, Mr. Miller said, well, what electives are you going to take? And I said, well, what's an elective? And he said, well, you don't just go to school and take the classes they teach you. You get to choose some in an open period. And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, what do you want to become when you grow up? And I said, I want to be an astronaut and I want to design spaceships. And Mr. Miller said, you'll need algebra. And I said, what's that? And he said, trust me. And I did. He didn't laugh at me. He didn't discourage me. He said, here's a tool you need. So I went into Sunnyside Junior High School and I took algebra and I went on to geometry and trigonometry and math analysis. I took biology, chemistry, and physics. I took 2 years of Latin. I was in debate and speech and athletics. I believed in the Leonardo principle of the Renaissance person. In fact, my 7th grade art teacher at Outlook was named Mr. Leonardo. And I believe that was part of learning, and education is learning the world around you, and I love learning. I love to read so much, I'd read the back of the cereal boxes, which I think maybe sometimes irritated my family, but I wanted to read everything. I wanted to understand words and look them up. And I had a family of learning. My parents bought a set of encyclopedias, which I now have. I think it's 1956. And if we didn't know something or a word, my mother would say, look it up, and we'd all look it up. And we bought her another set of encyclopedias, and finally now I don't think they print them, you have to buy them online. But that's world knowledge. I sucked it up. So we couldn't afford really to send me to college. I was working all the kinds of jobs, maybe you were. I was working in the fields. In the springtime, we would cut other people's asparagus. We'd get up before dawn, my mother and my brothers and I, and we called it cutting grass. School started later at Sunnyside, as you know. During one summer, I worked at Snow's Packing, sorting and packing asparagus as well as corn. That wasn't going to get me to college. But fortunately, I had the grades to qualify for something called the National Defense Education Act. And it was financial support, loan and grant, for students interested in studying science and engineering, and for students interested in learning how to teach those topics. And because of that, I was able to enter the University of Washington in the fall of 1967. It was a big change from Outlook, Washington, going to Seattle. But fortunately, engineering was also a community. And I joined a department called Mining, Metallurgical, and Ceramic Engineering that was also pretty small. And we went on field trips and we had projects. And the reason I went into that department was I met the department chairman, Doc Muller, we called him. Now, it was kind of a rush. All the departments were trying to get students that had good grades. You know, would you want to be a chemical engineer, a mechanical engineer, a civil engineer? And I wasn't quite sure. I had no idea what a materials engineer was. But he showed me a picture of the next generation spaceship. It was called the Space Shuttle. This was 1968. And Doc could sell ice to the Eskimos, we said. He'd sell it to anybody. I looked at that picture and Doc said, well, what do you want to be when you graduate? And I said, I want to be an astronaut and I want to build spaceships. And he said, well, if you come to this department, I'll introduce you to NASA engineers. And that sold me. Absolutely. Now I need to back up just one other place, and that was engineering. So I got to my senior year and I was accepted into the University of Washington. And there were a number of scientific and technical topics I could have picked. I didn't know what an engineer was. So I went to my physics teacher, Mr. Anderson, and I said, what box should I check? And he's the one that said engineering. And I said, what's that? And he said, trust me. And I trusted him again. So then I get to Doc Muller, and he said he's going to introduce me to NASA engineers. I didn't say, what's that? I pretty much knew that, but I could trust him, and he did. I graduated in 1971, did some postgraduate work, and then went to work for Rockwell International building the Space Shuttle Columbia in California. I could have stopped there. I mean, how exciting to be working in California, getting up in the morning, have a plane flying you out to Edwards Air Force Base, the hangar doors open, it's like a science fiction movie, and here's the front part, the cockpit, and then the wings, and the rest of this spaceship that's going to take many people to low Earth orbit. And it was a great company to work for. They were encouraging, they gave me a lot of responsibility. And when I applied for the first astronaut class, the 1978 class, they celebrated with me. I flew down for interviews, went through the medicals. It was an exciting time. I was one of the final 100. And then in 77, they announced the first 35 astronauts for the Space Shuttle, and my name was not on the list. It was a disappointing experience. I had to go through some soul searching. Was I reaching too high? Was this an acceptable career? All of those things. What didn't I do right? So rather than call defeat and do something else, I wrote to NASA and I said, can you tell me what else I needed to do? What didn't I have? And it was very clear at that time that all of the civilian astronauts they'd selected had doctoral degrees. And so I said, well, I need to finish my PhD. But at the same time, NASA offered me a job in mission control at the Johnson Space Center, working for Gene Kranz, the man that saved Apollo 13, the man who wrote the book, Failure is Not an Option. He was my flight director. I became a guidance and navigation officer, and then 2 years later I applied to the Astronaut Corps again and was selected to the 1980 class. It started here in Outlook, Washington, in the fields. It started with a family who believed not just in education, but in learning. That's a covenant, right? Your university provides the education. The obligation is that you learn and love to learn, not just now, but throughout your life. And part of the lesson of going forward is that there will be failures, but don't let them deter your dreams. Learn from them. That was one of my lessons. When I was going to school, they used to talk about the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and that's important. Learn your languages, learn how to communicate, take as much math as you can. This is the 21st century. Take physics if you want to become an engineer and a scientist. Learn how to write and communicate well, because that'll be important to your employer. I've been an employer. It's not just what you know, but can you communicate it? But let me give you 3 V's. The first one's vision. Have a vision and make it a big one. Mine was the planet and the stars, but I have friends, they have big visions. They want to cure health problems. They want to build better bridges. They want to create better communities. Have a vision and don't sweat the small stuff. And as a friend once told me, most of it's small stuff. Only put your neurons and your emotions to the things that really matter. Have that vision. The second V is values. Don't forget your values. Your handshake's your word. Your credibility will follow you the rest of your life. What you put on Facebook or not put on Facebook and Twitter can follow you for the rest of your life. Treat people well. That goes without saying. When I grew up here, it was, the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's as important and valid today as it was then. Your values are important. The third one has become sort of an old-fashioned word, but I call it valor. It used to be valor in battle, courage. But valor also means courage in your convictions, being willing to soldier on when you see adversity. Don't be part of groupthink. Do the right thing and do it in a civil manner. Because you will look back on your life, as my grandfather did at 92, and said, my success in life were the things I did right, the friends I made, the family I created along the way. So I don't know if those are helpful or not, but I shared a lot of your past. I was fortunate to have a wonderful family who believed in learning and education, who taught me values, taught me the value of hard work. And as a former employer, I will tell you, you may know all the world's knowledge, but if you have a good work ethic and you can communicate, those will be keys to success. And then don't forget valor. That's part of what makes us move forward. Have the courage to stand up and be your individual self. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Dunbar. So who was it that said that a young girl from Yakima Valley couldn't be an astronaut or a brain surgeon or whatever she wants to be? Although I did learn a secret last night at dinner. You probably think, first of all, she must have been the valedictorian of her class in high school. Her best friend from high school was sitting next to her at dinner last night, and she was the valedictorian in the class. So you don't even have to be the valedictorian in the class. I also picked up 2 or 3 other things. One, the number of times that you trusted a mentor, someone that helped you along the way, trusted their advice. And secondly, failure was not an option. They knocked you down once and said, nope, you're not in the program. Bounced back, and look what came out as a result. Thank you so much. Now, we do have a little gift for you as a speaker, and I want to call Russell, Jim, and Maxine Janice up. Every year we like to honor our commencement speaker with a special gift. This is a personalized Native American blanket. The blanket we're offering you today is entitled Full Moon Lodge Blanket. The description of the blanket reads, "The legendary Full Moon Lodge blanket illustrates the relationship between mankind, Mother Nature, and the creator of the universe, whose medicine is love. It acknowledges our place between the sun and the full moon. The design is based on a painting by Starr Hardridge." We'll send it to you so you don't have to fly home. Thank you. All right, now I also need you over here. And Lauren, chair of our faculty, is coming up. I think you introduce Lauren.
President Bassett, upon the recommendation of the faculty, I am honored to present to you the candidate for honorary degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, Dr. Bonnie Dunbar. I would like to introduce Dr. Lauren Schmidt, who will read the citation. Dr. Schmidt?
Thank you. Graduates, honored guests, Dr. Bonnie Dunbar has had a distinguished career as an astronaut and later in higher education. Dr. Dunbar grew up with 3 younger children, as she told us, 3 younger siblings, as she told us, on a homestead near Outlook, Washington. By age 9, she and her siblings were driving the family tractor and working the fields. Her grandparents were Scottish immigrants who homesteaded in Condon, Oregon. Her father fought in World War II, turning down a scholarship to the University of Oregon to serve his country. Dr. Dunbar's younger brother followed in his father's footsteps, serving with the military in Vietnam, where he made the ultimate sacrifice. Dr. Dunbar was interested in space from an early age, eagerly reading the fantastic futuristic stories of Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, and Arthur C. Clarke. Growing up in the Sputnik era put the idea of going into space into the heads of almost every child in America. Me too. In Bonnie's case, the idea stuck. After graduating from Sunnyside High, she went to the University of Washington to study engineering and to pursue a dream of becoming an astronaut. That part of her plan took a few tries and a few years. Finally, in 1980, she was accepted as an astronaut candidate and eventually was made payload officer in mission control in the Lyndon B. Johnson Space Flight Center in Houston. She flew her first mission in 1985 on Challenger and completed 4 more missions before retiring from NASA in 2005. Her transition from NASA was an easy one, as her next assignment was CEO and president of the Museum of Flight in Seattle, a role which resonated with her years in NASA. She eventually accepted an appointment in the Cullen College of Engineering at the University of Houston, where she led their STEM Center for 2 years. Today, she is Distinguished Research Professor of Aerospace Engineering and Director of the Institute of Engineering Education and Innovation at Texas A&M University. Throughout her career, she has broken barriers for women in STEM careers. She has met the incredible challenges that every astronaut faces, and she has been tireless in promoting STEM education for all students. The Heritage University faculty proudly recommend Dr. Bonnie Dunbar for an honorary degree as Doctor of Humane Letters. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. By virtue of the charter granted to Heritage University in 1982 by the state of Washington, and by the authority vested in me by the Board of Directors, and upon the recommendation of the faculty, I confer upon Dr. Bonnie Dunbar the honorary degree, Doctor of Humane Letters, with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities pertaining thereto. My pleasure, and they're going to hit you. Got it? Great. That's great.